Oh, there we go. Welcome, I'm Walcom, and this, in my opinion, is the absolute pinnacle of NERF Pump Action primary blasters. But I already have the pinnacle of NERF primary pump action blasters. Yeah, don't get me wrong, that one is really good, especially for the price. It's pretty much unbeatable. But when it comes to features, it's got nothing on the Javelin M4X. And really, that's what this entire video is about, because for most of you, this blaster isn't going to matter. But for others, if your primary ever felt like it was a little bit lacking and you wanted something slightly better, I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with your 90s Camry, but I mean, you could do a little bit better if you wanted. Then this, in my opinion, is the best you can do right now. This blaster does everything and then some, better than anything I've used before. But I've covered a lot of pump action magazine-fed primaries on this channel, and I know time is a linear thing and stuff always improves, but if you remember the original Javelin from Spitfire Products, that was my favorite blaster, and barely anybody watched that video. The Javelin M4X, the sequel to Spitfire's original Javelin, blows that out of the water in every single way. This blaster does everything. Every inch of this 3D printed, handmade, beautiful piece of art has a feature. But let's start with just getting the blaster. If you want one of these things, you can head over to the Etsy link down in the description below and pick one up from Spitfire Products. They hand build it and they ship it to you, and you can even buy this thing at the cheapest price with none of the extra fluff, because almost everything about this blaster can be customized except for the main receiver. However, there's also a build-it-yourself kit in beta right now. Other people have been building these, and past even being able to get one of those in the near future, there's also talks of this being licensed out to other stores in the hobby, with talks for those shops to be able to customize this blaster however they choose. And that's why it looks pretty basic, because it's just meant to be functional, feature-packed, and whatever else people want they can add later. I don't know, that looks pretty realistic. Well, yeah, because all the parts on this thing are compatible with real steel parts, so it's gonna look kinda realistic, but even if you were to take that Striker 2.0 and give that a flat, matte, black paint job, I'm pretty sure Susan would still call the cops on you. That was actually one of my main concerns about this blaster too, but it's not really meant for like the casual player crowd. This is straight up meant to be a competitive blaster from the get-go. And if you were to take all this furniture and throw it on a Tryon, or vice versa, it looks pretty much like a game-face Tryon, and nobody really complained about that thing. Starting off at the front, we've got the Scar muzzle on here because the barrel's a standard 16mm outer diameter, so whatever Scar muzzle you want to use, whether it's one of the Dart Zone ones or a very expensive one from overseas, your M4X is compatible with it. This is one that Spitfire made of their own design, and it is pretty good, but it's just a standard 3D printed Scar muzzle. It has rifling grooves on it, so as the dart exits the barrel, the foam catches those grooves, spins the dart as it leaves the blaster, and stabilizes the dart in flight, increasing your accuracy. But the Javelin M4X uses standard hobby barrels, which you can remove like that. It literally takes a second, if that. It's a threaded collet design, and it works extremely well. Swap it for shorter, longer barrels, doesn't matter. You can do it in an instant with no tools whatsoever. And that's already a genius design. This piece right here is actually more like a tool to help wrench this on. You can leave it on here like that, but it can come loose and flop around and be annoying, so just keep this in your bag. So a ton of value right there, but then we go even further back. The entire top length of the blaster is one big long Picatinny rail, so we got 3D printed Picatinny iron sights here that actually have fiber optic in them. And then we've got the angled riser right here, the Picatinny rail on it, or you can just put an accessory on the Picatinny rail, sights, whatever you want. Underneath that, we've got the priming grip. This is how you prime your blaster back. And the priming block is a Picatinny rail, so you can just take this grip off, put on whatever one you want, and you can even buy the blaster without this one, so you can save some money. And of course, the most important thing about a primary blaster is how nice it is to use. And for a pump action magazine fed Springer, you need to hit a variety of different ranges, and for that you need to have pretty hefty spring loads, and that could mean they're difficult to prime. In recent years, become less of a problem as blasters become way more primable, but this one, yeah. This is the smoothest prime I have ever felt on a blaster. This is ridiculous. It's got 2 bearing rails on it, and it is no wobble, just completely amazing to use. And that means you can fire this thing out all day and you won't have any elbow problems. This is as nice as it can get. It's also a relatively short prime because the overall length of the blaster is meant to be relatively short for pretty much anybody out there. And there's even 2 different plunger rods that you can get, so it actually catches in different places. So if you do want to kind of monkey grip your blaster, like, oh no, I don't want to hit my hand on that, you can get another plunger rod that will catch a little bit sooner to give you more of a rest between there so you don't have to worry about it at the cost of a little bit of performance. Behind that, we've got the Magwell, which is flared, so it's a little bit easier for you to reload. It takes standard Talon mags. You've got a lever mag release right here, but you've also got a push button mag release on both sides if you happen to fancy that. And if you have the blaster primed to press it, it does freely drop mags. And then we've got the grip and the trigger. Starting with the trigger, this has a very limited amount of travel, but it is hinged, and you can see how nice that trigger is. You heard that satisfying click, and then you can see the travel right here. Just super crisp, clean, easy, beautiful. I love it. And that's going to mean a lot for your accuracy. And then behind that, you've got the grip, which this is a 3D printed one and is basically identical to the one that you found on the original Javelin, if you were one of the 6 people that actually picked one of those up. But it is a standard, I believe, AR or M4 pattern grip, so you can swap it out with whatever you want in that bolt pattern. And underneath that grip, you've got a storage compartment, at least with the stock one. Open up this little guy, and you've got a full suite of spare O-rings. You've got even more O-rings if anything ever goes wrong, and it even includes a little bottle of lubricant. Or if you want, you can just fill this thing up with M&M minis and be done with it. That means you never have to worry about this blaster having any kind of seal issues. You could just swap it out with a brand new O-ring and be ready to play in seconds. Behind that, we've got some 3D printed sling loops, which feel really sturdy. They are 3D printed, and that could be a potential durability issue. But if you're worried about them, you've got M-lock up here. You've got rail that you could attach any kind of sling mount to. And then, of course, you've got a buffer tube stock, which is going to be compatible with any other buffer tube style stock. This is one of Spitfire's own designs, which is extremely comfortable and even has a slot for a QD point right there. And yeah, buffer tube stock. You can adjust it into multiple positions if you want, but it's a buffer tube stock. It has the cheek riser on it, which is extremely comfortable. I think he sells the hardware and the files for just a couple of dollars, and that is so worth it. However, even if we remove that stock, and again, put whatever one you want on it, it's got a thing! This is the coolest piece of tech on this blaster because it is an adjustment knob for the pre-compression on the spring. At its minimal setting with the 1.5 spring that Spitfire just kind of made for this blaster, this hits about 190 to 210 feet per second velocity-wise. The dial has a little happy face and a smiley face. If you turn it towards the happy face, you lower the velocity. But if you turn it towards the frowny face, you increase the velocity. And this is ridiculously smooth. And it does have about 40 turns of travel inside of it. And you can change this thing for single-digit velocities super easily. But that also means that if you're worried about somebody like taking their stock off after they've already chronographed their blaster and increasing the velocity and thus kind of cheating, well, just look for the person that ripped off their stock and is sitting there somewhere doing this furiously for a while. But yeah, let's say you have a 220 feet per second cap. Well, instead of just trying a bunch of different spring and barrel combinations, you can just have one spring and barrel combination and just twist this knob until you get about as reliably close to that cap as you want. But this thing will go all the way up to about 250 to 260 feet per second, which is a ton of room for adjustment. Just wait for that click. It's gonna be, a lot harder to prime, but still very smooth and still extremely usable. And now to turn that all the way back down. Thankfully, at the minimal position, it actually does just physically stop the knob. That's a sentence that's going to be taken out of context. That's all great, but it's not even the greatest. If you wanted to change out that spring, or if you wanted to replace any of those O-rings, how exactly are you going to do it? Does it have tools located somewhere on here for the complete disassembly of the blaster? Nah. Completely toolless disassembly. In fact, I'm not going to cut this point. I'm just going to have you watch me do it, because if you unscrew this little thumb screw right here, pull it out, and on the other side, you can see the pin right here, that single pin. If I use the flat part of that screw, and I push that in, give a little bit of a head start, and then I can either try to rip this out, or just use the other point of the screw, push that pin completely out. So now I can grab it and remove it. Like so. And then I take that same thing and put it in the hole just behind that main one. And that locks the trigger group into place so it doesn't fly out when you disassemble your blaster, because if we remove that mag, we could take apart this entire blaster and service every single inch of it without a single tool. No little jangling keyring pins, no multiple pins, one pin and one thumb screw. This is the 1.5 spring. You can put in stronger springs if you want higher velocity. However, that's going to make it a much harder prime. And if for some reason you thought that was everything, well, at the front of the blaster, if we do unscrew that barrel again and remove it, we'd actually pull off this whole front piece here. And there's 2 screws located on these bars, and you can actually tighten those so your priming grip will lock in the forward position, or tune how much force there is on that lock depending on how much you want. So if you're running around with this thing primed and you don't want this to move at all, you kind of want it to lock into position, you could just tighten those 2 screws and it will stay in that position, or loosen them if you want it to kind of flop around like that to make it a little bit smoother for you to prime. It depends on what you value. And of course, and all of those things together make this by far the most feature-rich, customizable, most beautiful pump action I have ever used. If all you're about is performance, well, while this is fine, it's not going to be the hardest hitting, best blaster out there when it comes to sheer velocity. But games have velocity caps, and that's what this thing was built for. If you want it to go lower than 190, you're gonna have to swap out the spring and probably minimize the barrel. And if you wanted to hit harder, you could swap out the spring and barrel to go a little bit harder, again, at the cost of that priming weight. In my velocity testing, it hit anywhere from a low 200 upwards of 260 feet per second with standard Avenger Force Pro darts. I found the foam laser scar that came with the Javelin M4X to be pretty good, all things considered, but the second I put on my HQ Technologies B-Car, well, when I first got the blaster, I hit the highest number I ever had on that screen at 95. Of course, this test is open to a ton of human error, but I have no qualms in saying this blaster is extremely accurate. So even at its maximum range, you feel like you could tag whatever's in front of you. Of course, being a 3D printed blaster, not only can you change out all those parts I mentioned previously, but it can come in whatever colors you wish. The full setup with everything you see here exactly how I have it is about a $250 blaster, and if you're ordering it from Spitfire Products, you might have to wait a while because he's one guy and a lot of people want his stuff. Oh, there we go. However, the hardware kit is in beta, so that will be available soon, and hopefully other stores will also be carrying this blaster so it's a little bit more accessible. And I truly hope everybody who even has a tepid interest in this blaster can get their hands on it, because it is fantastic. It is by far the best pump action I have ever used. It has all of the features with one omission, which was omitted because it's not something most people want, which is slam fire. I love slam fire, but adding slam fire to this would jeopardize the trigger, probably jeopardize the actual length and chunkiness of the blaster, and most importantly, doesn't let you easily deprime the blaster because you can't just pull the trigger when you prime it back to deprime your blaster. If you're worried about how realistic this looks, just put on different furniture so it doesn't look as realistic. You have nearly endless options. But on top of the sheer value this blaster gives you, because quite frankly, it's gonna be the only blaster you would need, you also just have the fact that it is the nicest blaster you will probably ever touch. And that's something that you can only resonate with if you've ever used a blaster at a game for an extended period of time and had a really sore elbow and arm at the end of the match. We've come a really long way on blaster technology, and I definitely feel like the Spitfire Javelin M4X is the pinnacle of that. It adds in every single feature you could possibly ever think of, and then more, in a nice, short, compact, customizable package that, even though it's a handmade, custom-ordered blaster, still doesn't even break the bank at the most expensive price point. If there's one blaster that needs to be injection molded, it is the M4X. This is the future. I know a lot of you out there aren't going to believe me or don't trust me for whatever reason. I wasn't paid for this video, I was just sent the blaster. And Spitfire Products doesn't get to see this video before it's done. They just trust my assessment. Even if you are the craziest doubter hater out there, there's gonna be other reviews of this thing in the future, and I hope you all get a chance to even sniff this blaster because it is freaking amazing. And honestly, it's hard to think where blasters can go from here, at least in the primary pump action mag-fed category. I seriously hope in the future that we see this coming from a company injection molded exactly as good, if not better, than what we have right here. Because quite frankly, this blaster is unbelievable.